Every week, by the way, with a little kind of like a video vlog discussion in my office here and talk about things that weren't in the video that you want to consider. I want you to think about 3 words today: castback, comeback, and angle of casting retrieve, angle of cast. So those 3 things: comeback, castback, and angle of retrieve. Those are key things that you can employ in your strategy to come back on a muskie that follows. And that's what this is all about, is how do you trigger a muskie to strike that follows. Now, none of the stuff I'm going to talk about today is guaranteed, but it works enough, often enough, that you want to execute this stuff and employ it into your game plan, okay? Let's first talk about the castback. When you get a follow, okay, one of the first things you should do is try to read the mood of the fish. If the fish is hot on the bait and it's got kind of a quiver in its fins and it looks like, and it's opening its mouth and it looks like it wants to take the bait, that's a fish that you got to get a cast back onto that fish right away. That's what we call a hot fish, okay? Now, a cast back, one of the terms we talked about, the cast back, I mean an immediate cast back to that fish. Unfortunately, most of the time, if you throw the bait, make a cast back to that fish, throwing the bait that the fish followed, it won't strike it. Not all the time, but most of the time it won't, okay? So you have to have a change-up lure that you can cast back to the fish. Now, in the case of the video here that you're gonna watch, the YouTube video that's up there on my YouTube channel right now, executing the perfect comeback, this fish, we tried to throw the top raider, we raised the fish on a top raider, tried to throw a top raider back on the fish, and like what happens in most situations, it didn't respond. But what can make that fish respond on a hot follow is to cast back a different lure. Here's a couple of change-up lures for topwater follows in particular that have worked really well for me, okay? If a fish follows a top raider in, for example, and it's bulging, it's hot on the bait, and it turns around and takes off, I will immediately put the top raider down. I will grab a big, big blades, a 10s or 8s on a high-speed reel, and I will immediately go back on that fish with this setup, with maybe 3 casts. And one of the keys to getting a fish to strike this lure is really hot retrieve. This is not a case where a slow or a medium speed or even a fast speed catches that fish. It's a bulging, burning. My friends called the Bucher Burn. And that was coined, by the way, by my friend Spence Petros years ago on one of my shows. So do the Bucher Burn with a big blade, with big blades, even a 700. We had a lot of success with 700s thrown back on topwater fish. Throwing 700 and just burning it. If that doesn't work, here's another thing that's worked really well, and a lot of times, in fact, it's worked so much, I've actually over the years been frustrated in the beginning by the success of this bait, because my old buddy, the dude, Chaz Martin, has just waxed me at doing this so many times, is grab a 4-inch lipless rattling crankbait like the JB Rattler. So you got this fish that followed in a bait. In this case, it's a top raider, but it could be just about anything when it comes to throwing this little JB Rattler. Is this fish follows this bait in, he takes off, he looks hot, immediately put down the rod you're throwing and grab a rod pre-rigged with a JB Rattler or a similar lipless crankbait and bomb cast that entire area with 4, 5, 6 casts and see if that doesn't trigger the fish. And more often than not, it does. It gets them. We kind of stumbled on this, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and if you check my YouTube channel, you'll see countless episodes where we have demonstrated this. In fact, it's gotten to the point where in my boat, whether there's 2 or 3 guys in there, there's a JB Rattler rigged on a St. Croix Legend Musky Tournament Downsizer 710 or 9 foot rod all the time. It's ready to go for this situation, and when a follow comes in, everybody is scrambling for that bait. So it's funny because, it's like, where's the JB Rattler? Where's the JB Rattler? Well, it's one of those things that as soon as a follow comes in, that's one of the first baits we go to. And that has been, super effective. Now, staying with the plan here with castback, the next thing is comeback. Let's say those things you didn't work. okay? And, admittedly, that's going to happen a fair percentage of the time. So what's your next plan? The next plan is to leave the spot and come back. Come back later. Well, how long do you wait on a following fish? Well, that's debatable. If you're in a situation where there's a lot of boat traffic, fishing pressure, tournament situation, just high fishing traffic thing, a lot of you guys fishing those Monday, Wednesday, Friday night musky leagues and stuff like that, it's hard to leave a fish alone a long time because somebody else is going to sneak in behind you and take another shot at that fish. If you have a low pressure situation where there aren't people banging away at that fish all the time, one of the best things to do is to leave that fish alone. I would say 30 minutes. If you can stand it, maybe a little bit longer, but maybe not too much longer. So I will visit a really big fish, especially every 30 minutes. And here's another thing I do, and that's called the comeback, by the way. Another thing I do is if there's any weather change, a wind switch, a cloud cover moving in, an approaching front, any kind of a weather change, any kind of a light change. If you're fishing somewhere and you have had no success at getting this fish to come back, one of the very best textbook times to come back on a fish is right at or right after sunset. You've seen me do this on countless videos and TV shows over the years. Check out a number of episodes. One that comes to mind right now is Last Light Lenny. Last Light Lenny, check out that episode. We had that fish. We did a comeback and a comeback and a comeback and a comeback on that fish. Chaz and I did throughout the day. And believe it or not, we raised the fish just about every time we came in on the comeback, but we just couldn't get it to hit. So the comeback after sunset, right before darkness, right before sunset is good. Right after sunset is much more deadly because the light is waning, while you're fishing, and it seems to increase their desire to strike a lot more. And that first hour, right into darkness, the first hour of darkness has been deadly too. Those are deadly times for the comeback. The last thing I want to talk about, the third thing, is changing your casting angle. One of the coolest examples of this, if you check out my YouTube channel, you'll see an episode called The Hunt for Goliath. Now, this is not the only time we've done this. It's happened a number of times, but visiting a spot that has got a big fish on it, you did the castback, you even did the comeback, and you weren't successful. This is exactly what happened. This is how it unfolded with Goliath. We raised the fish, did an immediate castback, didn't catch a fish. Then timed the comeback right at sunset, right before moonrise on a full moon, and a storm was approaching, and all three of those things together on a comeback did not trigger that fish. And I guess you could say most anglers, if you watched that episode, most anglers would have fished through that spot, put the trolling motor, stowed the trolling motor, fired the motor, and just said, okay, that fish just isn't going to bite, and leave. Well, the fish was big enough, and I guess I just had something in my experience or just a sixth sense about saying, hey, let's just turn the boat right before we leave and make one or two casts and from an odd angle back where we thought that fish was coming from. And that's what we did. And if you check that episode out, you'll see that Chaz and I are talking about, boy, we did the castback, we did the comeback. She just must not be here anymore. And then, instead of putting the trolling motor in stow and leaving, we said, well, let's take the boat to an odd angle and turn around and make some strange casts, odd casts back at this spot. Now, the fish struck, by the way, and I caught this beautiful fish we nicknamed Goliath. If you're in a spot like where I caught Goliath, you're kind of in kind of tight quarters. It's harder to create these drastic angles for the castback routine at various angles. But if you're on a reef situation, it's really good. You can just go all the way around that reef, hitting that fish from various different angles, and you can really create a really good situation there to present that lure at that muskie at a variety of angles. What you're going to find is that for some reason these fish might respond to following it in a certain way, and most of the people that throw at that fish are throwing it a certain way. But if you can reverse the situation and throw a bait at that fish from an odd angle, an angle that fish is not used to, that might be what it takes to make the fish strike. And that's how I got Goliath to hit on the hunt for Goliath. So wrapping it up, 3 things to think about when you please check out the episode Executing the Perfect Comeback. It's my first episode of 2020. Please subscribe and think about these 3 things. Castback, immediate castback to a hot follow. Second, come back to that fish periodically, trying different baits, trying different weather conditions, different light conditions, try to get that fish to strike. And lastly is change your angle and the way you're casting at that fish. If you try those things, you'll see that there's going to be a percentage of time where you're going to score.